Hello, Wei Chong here. So today we have a video topic on tracking your progress as a powerlifter, and it's a topic that's usually very closely followed by any powerlifting athlete. So I think one of the beauties and appeal of being a powerlifting athlete is that there's always objective numbers to reflect back on, as to whether or not you're making progress, how you're doing, in terms of your effort, your pouring of your intent into your training. So there are a couple of ways that we do track progress in ENSŌ, as coaches. So there are two main buckets. For me, I categorize it as competition lifts and accessories. Because in powerlifting, ultimately it's about the goal of increasing your total through the squat, bench, and deadlift. So we track the competition lifts very closely through a progress table, laying out everything. And we also track that across blocks. So from block to block, we are looking at whether or not your estimated 1 max has increased on the overview page. I'll give an visual example of what this looks like later. And then we are also tracking competition lifts and the variation lifts. For example, close grip bench press versus the competition bench press. So for accessories, the way I envision it, it's to track progress a little bit more with nuance. This still applies for the power lifts, but because we don't have like an objective progress table to track for accessories, what I tend to look at is intent, technique, repetitions, and load. So intent means if the athlete understands why they're doing the particular accessory that they're doing. Sometimes, just because the exercise occupies the accessory slot, it doesn't mean that it's meant for strengthening purposes or hypertrophy purposes. It can be just increasing range of motion. It can be just blood flow or like reducing stiffness in the particular body part that we are looking at. One such example is Jefferson curl. So although you can progressively overload the Jefferson curl, usually when I prescribe it, it's more for ranging post main lift so that we get an idea of the athlete's level of aggravation and pain, and as well as to reduce the irritation and stiffness that they experience. This usually applies for like injured athletes or athletes who have like lost confidence in lumbar flexion following a injury. So the idea here is, does the athlete understand and is able to demonstrate whether or not they understand the intent of the exercise, regardless of accessory or main lift. So for technique, right, we are looking at if they're able to do the exercise properly. I think with technique is always the underlying foundation for any lifts that we're looking at. But for accessory, I like to get my athletes to send me videos of their accessories. It's actually a very new practice that I've started doing because I noticed that, after 2, 3, 4 years of doing accessories, right, then someone will like send me their accessory having a question, then I realize that they've been doing wrong from the very beginning, which comes back to like intent and technique, right? So been trying to be a bit more diligent as to, okay, just look through the technique. I don't need to be like hyper focused on it as much as I am with the power lifts, but just a general understanding that they get the response that they want. Then moving on is progressing accessories in repetition and then load. So the way you can see it is, let's say you have 3 sets of 10 repetitions at 5 kilograms for bicep curls. So you want to first understand the reason behind why you're doing bicycles, which is to get bigger biceps. Then you want to have good bicep curling technique, making sure that you don't swing, you're keeping the elbows like close to your body or maybe slightly in line of the body. Then you are looking at progressing in repetitions and then load. So the first part, intent and technique, applies for main lifts. in terms of progressing, I'll progress in load over repetitions for the main lift because percentage wise is always simpler. What do I mean? So the smallest weight increment you can put on the barbell is 2.5 kilograms. If you have 100 kilo squat, that is 2.5%, right? But with bicep curls or dumbbell lateral raises, if you move from a 5 kilo dumbbell to a 6 kilo dumbbell, that's 1 kilo increment. Technically, it's like lower than a 2.5 kilo increment, right? But percentage wise, you are going like crazy high. You're like going up 20%. Imagine going up 20% on your squat in terms of week to week progress. Week 1 you squat 100, week 2 you squat 120. It gets quite ridiculous. So in terms of the main lift versus accessories, I will always recommend for accessories to progress in repetitions first, then load. But of course, week to week, block to block, you can always improve in technique and repetitions, and then the load will slowly increase. Right? So there's a lot of like me explaining to you like how I would like structure the progression for the main lift and the accessories. Then let's look at tracking. Okay. Oh yeah, so for accessories, right, when you're tracking from week to week, block to block, right, you want to look at the numbers that you're putting up, the repetitions that you're putting up. Because you don't have, you can't really track technique and intent on Excel. It's just something that you have to do on video. And at the end of the day, right, if you're progressing well in repetitions and load and you are getting physically bigger, your technique and intent must be of a certain standard, right? So it should reflect accordingly. So coming back to main lifts, this is the example of a progress table that we use in our Excel to track the main lifts. This is my personal progress table over a certain block. So you can see there's the top end estimated 1 rep max, then there's the average estimated 1 rep max. So the first column refers to the heaviest, the best set, the best estimated 1 rep max of that session. And the average refers to everything clumped up together to give you basically a summed average. And then everything else is just for the coach's reference in terms of the number of lifts, tonnage, average intensity, top set RPE, average RPE. So we are looking at squat, bench press, and the deadlift. So you should be able to see the numbers are like progressing in some ways from block to block, week to week. Week to week is going to be very difficult, except for like a beginner. But for more advanced athletes, you can always use this to look back on your progress block to block. Generally speaking, you should always compare the same portion of your block to the same portion of the next block. So for example, if you're doing intensity block, in which I term it here, and you look at intensity block week 1 and then compare it to intensity block week 1. If you compare like week 3 to week 1, you're gonna have like disappointment, because as you're slowly progressing through the weeks, right, you are supposed to see the numbers rise as you are getting more skilled, stronger, or like just physically bigger. Of course, it accumulates over months, but basically, you want to put the start of the block and analyze that with the another start of the block, or vice versa, the end of one block to the end of another block. And the intent of the block should be roughly similar. What does it mean? If you are going through like a injury rehab phase, compared to the peaking of a competition versus a normal just off season, like you're far away from any meets, exploring a lot of variations, a lot of different exercises, then the estimated 1 rep maxes will be very, very, very different. And if you try to compare between all these, right, you're gonna have a lot of disappointment in yourself. You have to be like, I've seen like people who come to me and like, look at my peak block, these numbers are so high, so good. Look at my current training block, like 2 weeks after that meet, it's so low. And be like, yes, because we picked you for that meet, for the estimated 1 rep max. You got very close to your top end strength with singles, doubles, triples, very high intensity, much lower volume. And then now, after the meet, we are stepping away from the competition list. We are working on variations that specifically target your weaknesses with higher repetition, maybe less equipment, like for example, rigid sleeves versus no sleeves. Then your maxes will drop like significantly when you look at the progress table. But then when you start to compare, right, it's like a very different phase of your fitness and your training that you're looking at. So it's not fair to yourself. Just something to take note of. We're making these kind of comparisons. Okay, so previously I was talking about tracking across blocks, variations, competition, week to week, block to block. Just want to show you like example of how I will personally like look at my own accessories and training, see if that helps you. Okay, so this is my training. We're just going to look at this particular portion here. Okay, so actually let's just zoom in. Just look at this. Okay, let me just zoom in. Actually zoom in. Okay, hack squats. So hack squats, right? We are seeing maybe not this one. Okay, let's look at this. Great. So I was going through this phase in my training where I was doing a lot of myo reps. So the way I record that, it's I do 15 repetitions for the first set up to like sort of close to failure, and I rest 5 seconds and I do another 5 reps, and rest 5 seconds and I do another 5 reps. So I record it as 15 plus 5 plus 5. So at least I have an idea of where I'm at in my first set and subsequent myo reps and how many like follow-up sets of myo reps I'm doing. So this is just how I record. But the idea here is so week 1 I set a standard for myself, and okay, I do 7 kilos, this number of repetitions, hit this number of RPE. As you can see, right, the RPE increases as I'm approaching the end of the session. Okay, this is how I'll look at for accessories. Then week 2, when I hit the gym, I will try to increase the load or increase the repetition. Or in the cases of myo reps, I might just add another additional myo rep set. So I'll be looking at 8 kilos, and then repetitions is 20 plus 5 plus 5. So in this case, you can see that there's 2 progressions going on. The first is the weight itself, obviously, from 7 to 8 kilos. But then we are also looking at 20 repetitions. And then we are also progressing through the session itself, because that day I was feeling like good for whatever reason. Then that's just how I want to push. But of course, as you can see, the RPE starts to like climb as well. And then for the third week, I put up these numbers. Okay. So there are several things that you can see also through your own tracking. One of the things that I discuss with my athletes is pacing, is to pace yourself from week 1 to 4. Nowadays, I write 4-week blocks. For this particular block, I was being like extra, and I write like an AB format for 3 weeks. So basically, I still do like 4 weeks worth, but it's like a 3-week block. Okay, I'm not gonna explain that. It's another like topic altogether, but basically the pacing, right, it's, let's say week 1 you set a standard with the intent and technique, and then week 2 you build up on that, and over time with the intent and technique built down, you should be able to focus a bit more on repetition. Then from there, the load will increase naturally as you're getting stronger and stronger to stay within the specified repetition ranges. So in week 3, then actually you can see that I'm starting to burn out on this. How do you tell? It's because I stopped doing the myo reps. So do 20 plus 5, and then it's just flat, and it's flat, and it's flat. But because the weight is also increasing, there's a lot more like stress going on, joint stress going on. That might be why like I just stopped doing the myo reps. And because you are near the end of the block, it also means that your fatigue is highest. Systemic stress has like accumulated. So as I'm going to the gym, I might not have enough energy, and that's why I count off the myo reps first. There's a lot of things going on here in terms of myo reps, repetitions, loading, increasing. Not the best example of how I'll tell my athletes to pace, but this is for me. In general, let's say from week 1 to week 4, week 1, 2, you set the pace. Week 2, 3, you build on it. And then week 3, 4, you can sort of sprint because you're nearing the finish line. You still want to save some energy for week 3, but like week 4, you sort of know like, okay, if I have excess energy, I can sprint. But usually, if you pace yourself well, you know that you have 4 weeks, people like die sooner than like on time. And from there, you can start to see like, okay, your workload capacity, like where is it in? Let's say you sprint and you like sort of like hit the wall in week 3, then you know you actually need to pace yourself better so that you can end well in week 4. Let's say you end in week 4 with like a ton of energy, even though you add additional sets, additional repetition, you kill yourself with myo repetitions, you still have a lot of energy. Then the next block that you repeat the 4-week cycle, you can add more sets or more weights and start from a higher baseline, basically adapting your approach slightly. There's to also like with that all said, right, at the end of the day, it's from block to block, session to session, you're gonna have like variables in your recovery and status. So don't always expect yourself to feel like you need to progress, whether or not is it in number of sets. It's just a general rule of thumb of how to review your own training and your recovery. Sometimes even when your recovery is on point, right, just the what people call external or life just happens, and that's okay as well. Okay, rant long enough. Oh yeah, so in terms of composition and variations, so what I like to do last time was I would track everything here. I was just like slapping everything onto this table and like, just giving myself an idea of like where I am with the different variations. So this phase of training for me was like me building up an idea of what variations worked for me and what didn't. It's a bit of a longer concept as well because then we are looking at competition squat versus high bar squat versus front squats or like whatever kind of squats that you do. You can even put hack squats here if you want to. Or like conventional deadlift versus sumo deadlift versus RDL. For me, I was doing a touch and go deadlift and conventional deadlift for the preceding blocks. That's why I have like the maxes here. High bar squat with V1 sleeves, which is the softer, earlier generation of the knee sleeves. And V2 is basically the more supportive knee sleeves. So I'll track like this. And I'll track my medium grip and close grip bench press. So for yourself, as you build your library of exercises, you can start tracking the strength across the variation lifts. And from there, you should be able to see like a correlation and causation relationship between your, let's say, your close grip bench press and your competition bench press. If the indicator variant lift goes up, your competition bench press should go up. You say there's no like good or strong correlation, right? Then you also know that this variant lift doesn't directly fit into your competition bench press. This relationship doesn't always work for various reasons. It's still good to just examine the circumstances around that kind of relationship. For example, if your shoulder is very banged up from always doing wide grip bench press, and so you do like close grip bench press because it's the only way you can sustainably like bench press. So your close grip bench press might increase over time, but every time you go back to your wide grip bench press, it suffers because the shoulder just cannot take it. Then your variant lift increases, but your competition bench press flatlines. So it doesn't always mean that the variant increases, the competition flatlines. That means you should toss out the variant. You should always look at the circumstances around that. In that particular instance of comparison, then I would think like, hey, every time you widen your grip, everything just sucks. Maybe consider narrowing your grip. And that is kind of like relationship that, or like kind of a hypothesis that we can draw from that kind of relationship. Very, very much specific to that relationship or like the context. Uh, yeah. So over time, you should see that if you do a block of high bar squats, V1, you want to push this number, then over time, as you track this, as it goes up and up and up, then it should feed well into your competition translation, or whether or not is it like on the platform, whatever. So this is how we will track, or I will track progress across the blocks, across sessions with the spreadsheet that we have. Okay, the video is 21 minutes long. Okay, I have like an ending session here. Basically, I do have experimental idea that it's like looking beyond the numbers. I've been messing with this for a while. With powerlifting, we do have a lot of objective numbers here when we look back on. So, comp squats, you squat 200. And then next block, you squat 210. Very good, you've progressed. But we are like, although the sport is very objective, but we're still like, end of the day, like human creatures who grow in different ways. So, experiment of mine is to look beyond the numbers and look at creating like sort of a curriculum with the modules. So just to share and maybe pick the brains of like people out there who is listening to this video, there are a couple of tracks that athlete will fall under. And when you look at conventional like understanding of a powerlifting athlete or whatever athlete that you look at, right, is there's a beginner, there's an intermediate, and then there's advanced. And then like you will fall neatly within like one of those based on your strength standards, which if you look at it doesn't really make sense because I've seen a lot of very, very strong people who compete internationally, but they cannot tell me like what an accessory does, or like what's a variation lift that helps them get stronger. So basically or like how to modify their training, or even like how to understand the differences between pain, DOMs, effort, that kind of thing. So you can actually have, theoretically speaking, a beginner athlete who has only lifted for like 1 year, compete internationally, and is also nursing perhaps a shoulder injury. So then you have athlete who falls within a beginner category in training, but because they compete internationally, the circumstances and the experiences they're facing, it's like way more advanced. And then they also have like an injury in the background they're dealing with. So what I was like thinking about is you create a curriculum with like modules that fall within a beginner, advanced, and intermediate, and then you have a rehab track as well. So you can have like overlapping domains, like a Venn diagram where like you have the person you can identify as a beginner athlete, but they are experiencing like modules or experiences in the advanced track by competing internationally. Then they are also dealing with something from the rehab track. So that will look like beginner, that will look like how do you film your videos? How do you rate RP? How do you modify your training if you're not feeling like the best? Then for advanced, you'll be how do you manage weight for an international flight? How early do you arrive at the competition venue? How do you peak across time zones? Things like that. Or another way is also how do you manage competition pressure on the international platform? How do you go about understanding yourself as an athlete when your handler is someone that's completely foreign to you? How do you communicate with a handler? Things like that. That's more of like the advanced track. Then you also have the rehab track where like how do you go about warming up effectively for your shoulder so that you don't aggravate it? How do you pick your attempts or pick your warm-ups or specific activation or rehab exercises for your competition warm-up or training warm-up that doesn't aggravate the shoulder? How do you modify your exercises when the shoulder flares up? How do you pick loads when the shoulder flares up? That'll be under the rehab or injury track. So you have those domains, then you have athlete that like forms like a unique Venn diagram for themselves. Then over time, you can also have like a living document. So basically it's like a shared spreadsheet where like the athlete comes in, they add the things that they want to learn. They pick and choose from the menu. Then the coach comes in and give notes on like whether or not it's being addressed, whether or not they have achieved it. And like when we do block to block training, then we include like certain training goals that address the modules that are highlighted. For example, how do you rate your RP for your competition lifts? How do you increase the library of exercises? Finding out the variations that work for you. And how do you modify your exercises when you are going overseas, when you are injured, when you are having high externals. So over time, you have like a compilation of the coach athlete notes. Then block to block, it should be like progressing in that intangible domains. And that's been the idea that I've been messing around with. It's gonna be like quite long, and I'm not sure the return on investment is there in terms of the effort and the time. But roughly, even just like talking about it, I think you can have an idea of how much is out there beyond the numbers. And yeah, that's just been what's on my mind. And at least the first 2 thirds of the video, you get an idea of how to track your progress as a powerlifter. Yep, I think that's it for today. See you for the next one.